Ken Leonard, Associate Director of Churches of Christ Disaster Relief, has joined us tonight to give us a little bit of insight on what they do and what they've been doing recently. About 10 years ago, we sent about 75 people from this church to Des Moines, Iowa, to help them recover from the flooding there in Des Moines. It's probably something that the Arthurs probably remember more than anybody because of what happened to their son. But it was a real good time that they had. It's a good time. It was a good thing for them to learn what was involved in all that. We support Churches of Christ Disaster Relief monthly, and we got this letter, kind of a synopsis of what's been going on in the last month or so, and it says, we are currently sending supplies to Texas, Louisiana due to Hurricane Harvey, and to Florida due to Hurricane Irma. We have recently sent supplies to Arkansas, Illinois, Louisiana, and Missouri due to flooding, and we are prepared to send more shipments of food, baby supplies, cleaning products, personal care items, water, appliances, bedding, and other much-needed supplies to victims of disasters as needed. I know that they work out of a local church in whenever the disaster areas, and I know they've been down on the coast, Texas coast, for quite some time. But Ken, like I said, Ken's an associate director of the Church of Christ Disaster Relief, and they're headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. He actually lives in Forney, Texas. He's been an associate director for 6 years, and he's married to Lori for 39 years and 3 kids and 3 grandkids. Former youth minister, former Kaufman County Commissioner, recipient of the President's Volunteer Service Award for over 500 hours working disasters with the American Red Cross in 1 year. Recipient of the Pillar of Community Award from the Southwestern Christian College. I know he's very active. He's got a lot of hands in all the things that they do around this area, and so appreciate if you guys would listen well to Ken as he comes and talks to us. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, what time do we finish up? I always tell that I was a politician before I turned to honest work, and if you go long, they won't vote for you. So I try to stay on time. It's funny, y'all worked at the Iowa flood. I was there with the American Red Cross, and I was doing client casework, and I was going out finding farmers that had gotten flooded, and there was a group of animal rights people that were rescuing pigs. The 2 things that they grow in Iowa are corn and pigs. And pigs, if y'all were there, y'all know pigs just washed down the river and just wound up wherever. And they were just running around town, you know. And so there was a group of people that were rescuing pigs. And they were suing farmers for shooting pigs in their cornfields. And it was the craziest thing you ever saw. And whenever I'd go to a farmer, they'd go, if you want to help, tell those animal rights people to go home. And I finally told them, listen, there's something you can do. I can't do it because I'm with the Red Cross. Just go find somebody that makes silkscreen t-shirts and have printed 2008 Iowa Flood Pig Rescue and Barbecue Team. If you want to get their goat, that will do it. I'm sorry I went there. Y'all brought it up, and I just had to talk about that. Y'all, I want to start off, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you a story about a disaster. And it wasn't a big disaster. It was an ice storm. But it was an ice storm outside of where Fort Drum is. What's the name of the town? well, I drew a blank. Anyway, close to Fort Drum, there was an ice storm. But then I'm gonna talk about the biblical foundation of what we do, and then I'm going to talk some about the disaster relief effort that we've just gone through with Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria. First, I want to amend the list. Not only were we working in those states, we just unloaded a container in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, which is new territory for us. We haven't ever shipped anything across the ocean, but I had to take a crash course on how to make it happen, and we've unloaded a load, and they have told us it's the most comprehensive load of relief they've gotten from anybody. And the Church of Christ in St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands is very popular right now. And right now we're gearing up to send them beds and furniture and appliances, which nobody is doing, but the Lord's church is doing it. Well, there was a terrible ice storm in Watertown, New York, I remembered. And it was even bad by New York standards. And there was a lady named Gladys that she was a crusty lady. She lived out in the middle of nowhere. As we say in Texas, she lived so far out you'd have to drive toward town to hunt. She lived way out there, and she didn't need other people. She had her house, her gardens, and her pets, and she just didn't really like being around other people, so she didn't do it unless she absolutely had to. She'd only go to town for groceries. She didn't have a TV. She didn't go to the movies. Well, Gladys was at home when the ice storm hit. This was back before cell phones. But the power lines snapped, and the phone lines went down. And so she had no communication and no power, but she was still okay. She had plenty of firewood, so she could keep a fire in the furnace and was going to be able to last until she started running out of food. And Gladys said, I had never prayed in my entire life. I didn't even know how to pray. But she had divided up her meals, and she had enough to eat today, she had enough for tomorrow, and she had no idea what she was going to eat after that. So she decided, I better learn how to pray. So she said, I'm just going to pretend that God is sitting in the chair in my living room across from me, and I'm going to talk to him as if he's in that chair. And so she started talking to God and telling him she was running out of food and that she needed some help. Well, it wasn't too terribly much longer when she heard a familiar sound. It was the sound of a four-wheel drive pickup truck on the ice coming up her road. Two men pulled up, got out, and they said, we just want to make sure you're okay. We know that you live way out here, and we want to pray with you, and we want to make sure you're okay. And she said, I'd be glad to. So they prayed with her. And she said, listen, can y'all please go to the store and get me some groceries? And they said, well, wait right here. And they went back to the pickup truck, and they got 2 of those boxes of food. Well, one of those boxes has enough food to feed a family of 4 for a week. Well, they put 2 of them inside of her house, and they told her, let us know if there's anything else we can do. And they got in their truck, and they left. Well, when the ice thawed out enough to get to town, Gladys went into town. She went to the Church of Christ there in Watertown, New York, and she went in and sat down across from the preacher, and she said, I want to talk to somebody about that little book. That little book is the New Testament that's in the top of every one of those boxes that we send out. Gladys had read it cover to cover. And you know what she said? She said, I want to be baptized into Christ. Now think about that for a second. She had no formal education whatsoever. Gladys didn't even know how to pray. But after reading that book, she knew she needed to be baptized. Well, Gladys experienced a change in her life. She only lived a couple more years, but she didn't die a lonely, crusty old woman who lived out in the middle of nowhere. She still lived in the middle of nowhere, but she died among brothers and sisters in Christ who cared about her, and she cared about them. Isn't that awesome? I love that story. That was Joe Dudney's favorite story. Joe was our first executive director. He worked until he was 91 years old. Never knew what retirement was. And a couple of years ago, he went home. But I still love that story and giving him credit. Mason told me he's friends with Ken Lowry, who's an associate director for the southern states. And Ken is awesome. My wife actually likes his preaching better than mine. If she recommends somebody go on the internet and hear a sermon about disaster relief, she suggests listen to Ken's instead of mine. But I'll tell you, do you know what Ken did last year? He was on the team to prep everyone that spoke, almost every person that spoke at the National Republican Convention. And he would teach them how to speak. He's an awesome guy, and we're thrilled to death to have him. I'm glad you mentioned him. Now let's go to the PowerPoint. And now let me see, which button do I need to push? Oh, I need to turn it on first, I bet. Okay. Matthew 25. When I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. If you want the default scripture for disaster relief, that's it. If you have any questions, just go back to Matthew 25. Who do we help? Well, I hear all the time when I call a church to ask them if they will do the distribution, you know what they'll tell me? Well, we didn't have very many members that were affected by the disaster. And I have to explain to them that's the wrong answer. We want to send stuff for everybody, for your neighbors, your members, everyone. That's what we're geared up to do. In the scripture, we read Acts 11. And one of my favorite parts is they were first called Christians at Antioch. But who were they? They were those Gentiles that weren't supposed to have the gospel preached to them in the first place. But other people who were converted from Cyprus and Cyrene obviously didn't get the memo, and they preached to the people in Galatia, to the Gentiles, and they were baptized into Christ. When Jerusalem heard about it, they said, we've got to send somebody to straighten out. So who did they send? They sent the guy who vouched for Saul when Saul was converted. They sent Barnabas to go check it out. So Barnabas went, and he basically decided it's going to be okay. And the scripture said because he was a good man and full of the Holy Spirit. Well, I thank God that those missionaries from Cyprus and Cyrene didn't get the memo. Well, Barnabas saw in their eyes the same thing he saw in Saul's eyes. He saw the future. He saw that that's where the future of the church is. And so he said, I have to put these two together. So he went back to Tarsus and brought Paul back to Antioch. And they spent an entire year. That's where Saul served his apprenticeship, is learning from those brand new Gentile Christians at Antioch. Well, then a group came from Jerusalem, including Agabus. And Agabus stood up and said there's about to be a famine. Well, what was the reaction of those brand new Gentile Christians? They said, there's people that are going to be hurting, and we've got to help them. So they started taking up a collection a full year before the drought actually happened. Have y'all ever realized that? That the drought hadn't even happened yet, but they were taking up a collection. So when churches aren't sure whether they can handle distributing stuff after a disaster, I always tell them, listen, disaster relief was invented by rank amateurs in the first century. It was those brand new Gentile Christians. Y'all remember when the explosion happened in West Texas, south of us? The fertilizer plant exploded and people heard it all the way here. My understanding was it showed up on seismographs all the way to Amarillo, Texas. I've driven to Amarillo. Amarillo is a long way away, but the explosion was massive. I drove down there the next morning because I happened to be in town, and the members of the church were already gathering stuff up to help their neighbors. And so I was talking to the elders and explaining how what we do works. And one of the elders, Brother Huffines, came up and said, Ken, there are news crews all out front of our building, and nobody feels like talking to the press. Would you go out and do it? Well, like you know from the introduction, I used to be a county commissioner in Kaufman County, so I'm used to talking to the press. I will tell you, we used to thank goodness for the Dallas County Commissioners, because there was almost nothing we could do bad enough to make the news. You cannot compete with those guys. But so I said, I'll be glad to go do interviews. And the first interview I did was with NBC. And the reporter said, how long have the Churches of Christ been involved in disaster relief? And without missing a beat, I said, since the first century. And he looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights. Have you ever seen a reporter that didn't even have a follow-up question? He just looked like that. That was this guy. So I explained what we're about to talk about the disaster relief effort in the first century and how it all began. And that's the answer. This all started in the first century at Antioch, and it's explained in Acts 11. Well, Paul did a good job of learning. Where am I? Okay. If you will turn to 1 Corinthians, the 16th chapter, verses 1 through 4. Paul learned to be ready. And we read this scripture all the time, but the context is there's a drought that's now going on. And so Paul is sending out an appeal. And he's sending it to Corinth, and he said, I told Galatia the same thing. Now, about the collection for God's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with his income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me. Well, Paul is quite the politician. He didn't say, just give me the money, I'll take it back to Jerusalem. He's saying it a different way. He's saying, I'll give letters of introduction so they'll know who it is that's bringing the money. And if it's okay for me to go along, I'd be glad to go along with them. And so Paul just said it the same way. Paul was overwhelmed at the response by not just the Corinthians, but he's talking about the entire area of Macedonia in 2 Corinthians when he says, and now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace that God has given in the Macedonian churches. Think about that for a second. He's not talking about Judea where the gifts were going. He's talking about the grace that was given to the churches in Macedonia, to the givers. He's talking about y'all, to congregations and individuals that are sending help during disasters. And he goes on to say, out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. Well, if they urgently pled with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints, and they did not do as we had expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us in keeping with God's will. You can see the emotion in Paul's writing. He could not. He was overwhelmed with their response to his appeal. That's the biblical foundation for what we do at Churches of Christ Disaster Relief. And if you drew it up as an organizational chart where you have churches and individuals up here at the top that are raising money and they're going to send it where it needs to be held, where it needs to be distributed, they're going to send it by way of Paul and Barnabas and probably other people in a caravan down to Jerusalem and Judea to be laid at the feet of the elders or the leaders, if there aren't elders, of the church where it's going to be distributed. Y'all, that's exactly the same organizational chart, only we serve as that caravan that are taking those goods from one place to another and laying them at the feet of the leaders of the local church to distribute. This picture, and I found an old PowerPoint. I was grabbing a PowerPoint, and I hadn't shown this picture in a while, but that was when the tornado happened in Cleburne, Texas. Y'all remember that a few years ago? There was a Cleburne and Granbury. Actually, this was Granbury. And we unloaded the truck into their Family Life Center, and we had to put the boxes over a rail. And there were these three little girls that there was a big circular line where people would grab a box, walk into the Family Life Center, set it down, and go get another box. Well, there were these three little girls that kept cutting in line to get another box. I mean, they were so eager. Well, it's hilarious to watch. Two little girls can handle a box pretty easily. Three is cumbersome, as you can imagine. And after everybody was dog tired of wagging those boxes inside, they were cleaning out the trailer, and she was begging for them to hand her the trash out of the trailer after everybody else had gone inside to get something cold to drink. And I got that picture, and I go, that's what the heart of a servant looks like. Since we began in 1991, we have distributed now over $150 million worth of relief to local Churches of Christ. Man, I keep double clicking. The first truck we send out has food boxes enough. The boxes have enough to feed a family of 4 for a week. And there's 320 boxes of food in the first truck that we send. There'll also be buckets of cleaning supplies, boxes of personal hygiene. Let me tell you about our personal hygiene boxes. A few weeks ago, well, a couple of months ago now, I was in Deer Park, Texas, and the Church of Christ in Deer Park, where I'm preaching in 2 weeks, they had served as a distribution center, and a lady came back to say thank you, and she said, the food was awesome. She said, but I especially loved the personal hygiene boxes. She said, y'all had toiletries in that box I never even knew I needed. True story. We send pallet loads of baby supplies, and there's 3 sizes. There's infants and toddlers, and I don't know what's in between an infant and a toddler, but we've got stuff for them that's in a box. We have water and drinks, and we'll have shovels, rakes, and wheelbarrows. And in a separate truck, we have you'll see in the video when I show it in a second, we have a 5,000 square foot freezer in our warehouse in Nashville, Tennessee. And you know how much frozen food costs us? Nothing. You know why? Because if the weight is a little bit off on a Hungry Man TV dinner, they can't sell it, so they just give it to us. It's the best deal on earth. And so once people start getting into their houses and we get them a refrigerator and help them get set up, then we'll send frozen food and fill up their freezer with TV dinners. This is the coolest ministry on earth. I am so blessed to get to do this all the time and get the hugs for y'all. Thank you so much. I love the hugs when I go to a disaster. We follow it up after the first truck. We also, if a family makes $30,000 a year or less, and doesn't have insurance, which after Harvey is almost everybody, because most of the damage was flooding, except in Rockport and Woodsboro. Once it got to Victoria, the majority of the damage was flooding from Victoria East. But we will send beds. We'll send beds for up to 4 people per household. We will send 1 room of furniture, and that's either a bedroom, a living room, or a dining room of furniture. We'll send 1 appliance. We count a washer and dryer as 1 appliance, or a refrigerator, or a stove, or a microwave. If they lost a microwave, we'll just throw that in as another appliance because they're not very expensive. Who else does that? I don't know of another organization that, I mean, I know a lot of organizations that'll give food and cleaning supplies and that kind of thing. I don't know anybody that gives beds and furniture and appliances as a regular course of doing things. And the Lord has blessed this ministry so much that we started doing that, and we're able to continue it. It's an amazing thing. I will tell you, every dollar that's contributed, I have a conservative number out there. We turn it into $3 worth of retail value. It's actually closer to $4. We quadruple every dollar that we bring in because we buy at wholesale prices. We buy for pennies on the dollar. 85% of everything we bring in goes directly to disaster victims through the local Churches of Christ. And when anybody asks, where did this refrigerator come from? If you're in Louisville, Texas, we encourage y'all to tell them it came from the Louisville Church of Christ, because that's who the people are going to see from now on. We don't want them to tell that stuff came. We're not ashamed of it. And if they want to tell it came from Nashville, Tennessee, it's just more effective. It was a gift to the local Church of Christ, and that's what people need to tell folks, is that it was a gift from the Church of Christ. And we always say we try to be the first ones there, and you'll see in the video that we have pallets filled with 6 truckloads all the time. And it takes one of our warehousemen on a forklift 1 hour to load a truck and put it on the road. So literally, assuming we can get a volunteer driver in a truck, it takes us 1 hour's notice to put a truck on the road and get it to the local Church of Christ. We're usually the last presence there also, because if you're sending volunteers, you got to bring people back home. Well, we're using the local Church of Christ, and if it overwhelms them, we're using the other churches in the area to do the distribution. I'm gonna leave, and if y'all look at our brochure, do y'all see the guy's shirt? She's a member of the church that had lost her home in Moore, Oklahoma. And that's her son that's with us. And if you look on the back, y'all get one of our brochures. And when we had our biannual meeting, we were looking at the proof of that brochure and just teasing. I said, well, I'm not sure how Texans are going to take having a OU shirt on the front of our brochures. Well, if you look at the brochure, they photoshopped it out. And I figured it out. They're going, well, we're in the Southeast Conference in Tennessee. We understand perfectly. Okay, if you would, go ahead and you can turn that off and go ahead and start the video.
And I mean, mobilized because they can be there within about 4 hours. They said they can have this truck packed and ready to go within the hour and on its way out to East Tennessee. So right here, they have cleaner with bleach, cleaning buckets, and these boxes are filled with food that can feed 300 families. We've got brooms, we've got wheelbarrows, everything that they would need potentially out there to at least start to rebuild.
We're here this morning to load 1,300 food boxes at Churches of Christ disaster relief effort. Our purpose is to follow the example given to us in Acts 11, where it talks about disaster relief in the first century and about the famine and all the food being given by the brothers and sisters. That's what we're trying to do here.
Whether it's a flood, a tornado, a hurricane, an earthquake, or a wildfire, when disaster strikes in the continental United States, the Churches of Christ disaster relief effort is ready to respond. Truckloads of emergency food, water, and other supplies are sent to congregations for distribution to victims in the disaster areas.
I don't know how you go on. I mean, I'm sure you will, but I mean, look at this. I mean, there's not a wall.
So many struggling to try and pick up the pieces.
When you see the school, you know, just by looking at this building, there are victims inside that school.
Our facility here in Nashville at 410 Allied Drive, we have a little over 86,000 square feet of warehouse. Because of the contracts that we have with the many vendors that we buy from, we can stretch the donation dollar. We can buy, for every dollar that we receive, 3 to 4 times what you would buy at retail prices. This makes us very efficient in what we're sending out.
This is one of our food lockers, 3,000 square feet. It keeps our Hungry Man TV dinners inside here, and we ship these out in the latter stages of our assistance of the disaster victims. Once they're back in their homes and have a refrigerator and everything to store them, then they can use them and heat them up and eat them as they see fit. We have approximately 200 to 300 volunteers here today. Before we're loading food boxes, we call over 600 people in the Nashville area, and with a 1 or 2 day notice, 300 or more will show up. That's what makes us successful, is our volunteers to do anything we need. Even our truck drivers are volunteers.
Well, help is on the way from Nashville to Florida residents still struggling in the wake of Hurricane Hermine. The Churches of Christ Disaster Relief Group has a truck on the road right now and is heading from Nashville to Perry, Florida. Help is on the way in the form of an 18-wheeler loaded with supplies.
The tornado area, they don't need the bleach. But in a flooding area, they need the bleach to kill mold.
There is breaking news in an unfolding tragedy. In West Virginia, at least 20 people are now confirmed dead in a catastrophic flood disaster, the worst in 100 years.
These boxes and this relief stuff, because we were able to get it so quick, we were able to become a center for distribution in our community. I appreciate Disaster Relief's role in that, helping us to be able to do that. I mean, it's overwhelming.
We have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of supplies, prepackaged, ready to send out to a local congregation to turn over to your leadership so that you can help your neighbors that have been devastated by the disaster. We don't send the people. We leave the work up to your local congregation.
The winds have really picked up here on Long Island. The rain is pelting us. This is the same storm system that caused those deadly tornadoes down south, and it's already proving deadly for this part of the country as well. High winds tonight battering the East Coast. A fast-moving nor'easter whipping gusts of up to 60 miles per hour, toppling streetlights in New Jersey, flinging trees into homes.
It brings to mind one congregation in Bayshore, New York, the Long Island Church of Christ. They had requests for over 100 Bible studies. That's what this is all about. It's another tool for the local church to reach out to the lost. Some people are most receptive to the gospel when they're down and out. This is one of those times.
It was a large tornado that tore through New Orleans east, destroying several homes.
That's when the roof went flying. And
Cheryl McBride took cover in the bathtub.
So as I got in, stooped down, the roof came off, things started flying. I just asked Jesus to cover me, don't let me get hurt. And the next thing you know, here we are.
The tornado left a trail of destruction, ripping off roofs, toppling trees, and downing power lines.
You don't have to pass the hat to collect your money first. We've got the supplies ready for you. All you need to do is get in touch with us. Let us send them to your congregation. You go to work and save the lost.
5 men located throughout the United States are available to share the mission and purpose of the Churches of Christ disaster relief effort. Dwayne Castile serves the northeastern part of the country. Ken Lowry is available for service in the southeast. Dennis McClintock provides information to the central states. Ken Leonard serves the south central part of the country. And Dale Lengie provides information to those in the west and northwest.
I'm Miguel Almaguer in Southern California, where the strongest storm to pummel this region in years brought record rainfall, mudslides, and a flood of water rescues.
Tonight, the destruction in Mississippi is overwhelming.
You can hear like glass shattering. You can hear the roof caving. I feel like I'm lucky, I'm blessed to be alive.
In 2 days, the path of destruction spreading over 550 miles.
And I thought we were going to die last night.
Including through Polk County, Tennessee, where Jennifer Young, her husband, and 2 sons barely escaped.
Ringing up my husband saying, there's a tornado coming, there's a tornado coming. Get the kids, grab the kids.
Wind just came out of nowhere and just blew it.
17,000 acres here burned. Jerry Morgan lost all her mother's keepsakes, including photos, treasures that took on extra meaning after her mom died recently from cancer.
All of her china, all of her silverware. Everything's gone.
When we redo that video, there's some new information we're going to have to put on there. The Highland Heights Church of Christ in Houston has baptized, I lost count at 19 people. They baptized 19 people as a direct result of the relief effort. They set up over 400 Bible studies. The Fifth Ward Church of Christ baptized 8 people the last count I had. There's some awesome things going on. But because of y'all's support and churches and individuals like you, we were able to not only set up distribution in 32 churches in Texas, but half a dozen more in Florida, a couple in Louisiana, and we're sending stuff through Healing Hands International to Puerto Rico, and we're sending stuff directly to St. Thomas and the Virgin Islands. Just want to tell you thank you so much for your support in making this possible. Last thing, I want y'all to add my family and friends to your prayer list. My childhood best friend was Brian Holcomb. He was the preacher who was killed in Sutherland Springs along with 7 of his family members. And Stephen Williford is my first cousin and my 4th brother. And he's a member of the church. He was the guy who heard the shooting a block away and went and saved the rest of that congregation with his action. But y'all keep him in your prayers. His life has changed drastically. But thank you so much for your support. And y'all remember that I talked about Gladys, that Gladys read the New Testament, and the conclusion she came to is, I need to be baptized into Christ. If there's anyone that has reached that conclusion, and if you would like to be baptized, or if you need the prayers of the congregation and you need to be lifted up, we would love to do that as well. If anyone has a need, please come forward as we stand and sing.